Hi, friends. Thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to my guest, Chaandani Khan. 6 years ago, a brain injury derailed Chaandani's entire life, which left her navigating PPCS, persistent post-concussive symptoms, and an overwhelming amount of loss. Preparing a cup of tea, washing clothes, and sending emails became monumental challenges, and her familiar, fast-paced lifestyle appeared impossibly far out of reach. Going through years of recovery appointments and eventually ingraining herself in the concussion space allowed her to identify key gaps in service and systems that patients face and the demand for a new path forward. She is now a survivor turned educator for practitioners who serve the concussion PPCS population. She currently teaches educational workshops and looks forward to announcing the launch of her learning community for professionals before summer 2025. She aims to lead lasting change in the overall space through education and innovation. So thank you so much for being here, Chaandani. I'm so excited to have you share your story and to get to know you better.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here with you.
So tell us about your injury. What happened? How long ago was it? Give us all the details.
Sure. So it's actually, as of this month, it was 6 years ago. I was in a car accident and I had neck and back injuries, but the worst of all was a concussion.
And yes. Okay. So the concussion was the biggest lasting part of that. What were the main symptoms that you dealt with following, as part of your concussion?
Oh my gosh, it's quite a laundry list. As anybody who's ever had a concussion before knows, or anyone who works with them, there are different areas that you can be affected in. I won't go into the entire list, but I will kind of give some examples just to sort of bring it to life. After my concussion, I had a lot of cognitive challenges. And what I like to do in the way that I show up when I work with people and businesses now, I like to share symptoms and acknowledge that often it's just in the form of a symptom list. But what I like to do is then translate that through to the life experience as far as the impact.
Yes.
And so I'll give examples along those lines. So after my concussion, I was no longer able to figure out how the heck to make a sandwich anymore. It was just, I knew I had eaten a sandwich. I knew I was hungry in the moment. I could think about some of the ingredients that I might put into the sandwich, but it just did not make any sense to me as to how I was supposed to go about creating something that I could actually eat. So that's an example. Another example is that I had an extraordinarily hard time keeping up with basic conversations. So, basic like, hi, how are you? How's your day going? Like those kinds of conversations were challenging, and even more so challenging when there were multiple people involved. I now know that to be the multitasking, executive functioning, multitasking, organizational tasks. Again, I'm going to stick to my specific examples like this that I think really kind of bring to life and that some people might connect with as well. Doing something as simple as going into my closet and picking out clean clothes to wear for the day, that used to be so easy for me. I'd walk in, I'd think about what shirt I wanted to grab, I'd grab it, I'd wear it, I'd go on with my day. But, it became very different. It became a monumental challenge where I'd walk into the closet and I would just become so overwhelmed by just the amount of items in there. And to be clear, I didn't have a massive closet. It was very average sized. So I wasn't lost in there. But I'd become terribly overwhelmed. I couldn't think about, what was clean, what was not clean. How did I put it on my body? It just was a very overwhelming experience. And, I remember multiple days and throughout weeks and throughout months where I'd try to just do that very basic task. And I'd end up sitting on the ground and just crying for maybe an hour or two because I was so overwhelmed. I was confused and very much not acting, thinking, or behaving like myself that I had known for so many years.
Yeah, that I appreciate the real life examples because I think people will be able to relate to those for sure. And it kind of highlights what the symptoms, how the symptoms impact the actual like day-to-day living. So I think that's really helpful. I'm curious, were all of these things, did they happen right away? Was it like the next day after the accident, you were like, oh, wait a minute, now I can't choose what I want to eat for lunch or choose a shirt to wear? Was that, how quickly did they come on?
That's a great question. And I really like that you're calling attention to this. It definitely shows your expertise in the field. As we know with concussions, some symptoms might appear shortly after the injury, but generally symptoms do appear over the next few days or few weeks. And so I fell into the latter where there were, immediate concerns with understanding and following language. Oh my gosh, I found myself in the first couple of days after this accident, sleeping, like relentlessly sleeping. Like I'd sleep for, hours on end and have an extraordinarily hard time waking up, for example, which was very much not my normal.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the days and the weeks that followed, lots of different symptoms started appearing, as well as, again, the associated life challenges. And to the point where I was no longer the very high functioning, high achiever type A that I used to be. I was not operating that way whatsoever.
Yeah. And were you, I'm just curious as far as like, you're a very independent person, obviously. Were there other people, I don't know, what was your living situation? Like, did you have family or roommates or somebody that you were with that like noticed or was able to help with any of these things? Or were you kind of navigating it on your own?
I was living alone at the time. And then I sought help from my mom too. Yeah. It was extraordinarily hard doing very basic things, living on my own.
Yeah. Yes. And I think I want people to hear that because you're not the only one who's had that experience where it's like, wait a second, I can't even take care of myself anymore. That definitely happens. And I feel like it feels so unfair. I know that's not a very like happy coaching thought to put out there, but like, it's so people don't know that is something to even expect, or like that this is something that can come from this kind of injury. Like, it's just,
that's exactly the thing is just this lack of knowledge, lack of awareness in the space. My gosh, I could have a full, massive hours long conversation about just that in itself. But really there are a lot of gaps in knowledge in terms of public awareness. Even in the medical community, there are gaps in knowledge. And that's why very specifically, it's become so important after living this myself and after connecting with thousands of people and hearing of their pain points and their struggles and their journeys. It's so important for me to really share every time I have a conversation. Yes, there are symptom lists and those are important and we need those to gauge where someone's at, but we have to kind of shift our thinking in terms of what is the life impact. Because for me, I kept on finding myself in these places thinking, whether it was an appointment or another questionnaire I was filling out on how XYZ symptom was performing or moving in my body. And I kept on asking myself, what about the lived experience? And that's the part that I think is great for us to dive into and just kind of put out there for people to think about.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like you can look at a symptom list and it says, difficulty with organizing, like the executive functioning, cognitive piece specifically, like you might have problems with these things or feeling, the nervous system autonomic pieces of it, like the overwhelm and the light sensitivity, all of those kinds of things. Like you can read those and people can relate to them if they hear it. But when you put it into I couldn't make this decision anymore. I couldn't figure out how to do this. I couldn't go into the public grocery store, like all of those things. It just kind of, it makes it real and hits home a lot more. I'm curious, were you warned at all? Like did you see medical professionals right away or like, how did that come about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have much to say on this topic. So in my personal experience, yes, I did seek medical attention right away, and I did start attending recovery appointments as soon as possible after my injury.
So tell me a little bit about how your life changed. And so we talked about this a little bit, like what the symptoms led to and how your life was changing, but how did you cope with those changes and how did that injury affect the other people that were in your life?
So this is a very juicy question, juicy answer. There's lots to cover here. So as far as how my life changed, I'd like to share a little bit about my old self, just so we can see the dichotomy. So my old self, I worked 50 to 70 hours a week in the events industry. And so it's very chaotic. It's very dynamic. I personally really loved it. I still have a bit of a love for it in my heart, the chaos behind events. But I worked with anything from music festivals to street festivals to trade shows, PR stunts, and anything under the event umbrella you can think of, I've probably worked with at some point. So I did that. And additionally, I was very social. I loved going out. I loved hosting friends at my place. I was an avid volunteer. I also had various hobbies that I made time for, as well as some sports and activities. So I was living a very fulsome existence. Then, the accident happens, the injury occurs, and my life afterwards, as I mentioned, I couldn't make a sandwich. I wasn't leaving the house reliably with two shoes on my feet. I'd leave with one shoe, I'd get outside, I'd look down, I'd see one shoe, one sock, and I would know something was wrong, but I could not figure out what the problem was. And again, I'd experience emotional dysregulation, then I'd find myself crying again and just being in this awful state of confusion and frustration and fear and, this awful loop. So it was, one can imagine going through struggles on that sort of basic daily living level that really rippled out into different parts of my life. And so, I wasn't able to work as I was lacking a lot of cognitive functioning and skills. And of course, along with that comes finances. That was a struggle as well. And as I mentioned, I wasn't able to be a good friend or family member because that was something that was always so important to me and something that I defined myself by, is being able to show up for people and be with people and walk alongside people that I love. But I wasn't able to do that nearly at the same level, if at all. Things like my volunteering passions and my aspirations and my dreams, and those all became just kind of blew away in the breeze. And I had to let that happen because I was hyper focused on things like, I remember this one specific challenge I was facing for a very long time, for months on end, was to boil water in an electric kettle while also frying an egg. That was incredibly challenging for me. So I had to be hyper focused on things like that instead of, what's the next trip I'm planning overseas? Or, being able to hit milestones that people were hitting around that time. So extraordinarily different. You'll have to remind me of the second part of the question because I believe
Yeah, no, you're good. Sorry. I asked two kind of unrelated ones. So the second one was how did your injury affect the people that were closest to you?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. It feels very nuanced. And, I say this on behalf of myself as well as on behalf of others who I've been privileged to hear their experiences of, people who have gone through concussion as well as PPCS, the persistent symptoms. It's nuanced because if your concussion injury occurred in a way that didn't leave any scars or any blood or any bruises or any kind of visual cues for someone outside of the experience to see, then someone outside the experience just perceives you as the you that they've always known. So in some ways, unaffected, I'd say. In other ways, of course, people who love and care about you are concerned, and you're not acting like yourself, you're not talking like yourself. They're concerned, they're trying to help. They might not fully understand it. And I think that in some cases with some close friends of mine, and I'm really privileged to have a couple of them, and I had these conversations, and I have goosebumps as I'm sharing this now, just because I find it so deeply touching still. But just these conversations of, I don't exactly know what you're going through, but let me find a way, like help me find a way to support you. How can I not understand it, but still show up for you is what I'm trying to say. And that was, deeply moving then. And it still is deeply moving today to think about that. So people work in lots of different ways.
Yeah, thank you. We will loop back to that of like how people, maybe what your answer to that was for people. But I'm curious in the meantime, how, you talked about, you defined yourself by how you showed up as a friend and a family member, these things that I'm sure your work was really important, the travel, all of these things that were so important to you were just kind of ripped out from under you. Like you didn't have those as options anymore. I actually just had a conversation about identity and concussions with somebody recently. And so this is kind of top of mind. So when you brought this up, it's just like really there. I'm like, how did you learn to, how did that affect your sense of identity? Or were you even able to think of that because you were just trying to boil the egg or fry the egg? Or how did you how did that transition? How did you learn to know who you were and love yourself through and after this?
This is a big one as well. And I'm so glad that we're going there. Exactly as you picked up on what I was just saying. Like in my mind, I was like, oh, I hope we dive into identity. Like, let's go
Perfect.
here.
Let's do this.
It's funny. This morning, I was just having a conversation with someone else with PPCS around identity. And it's a topic that I speak to quite often because it's one of what I refer to as those sort of dusty corners in the PPCS experience that, it's uncomfortable to think about. It's extraordinarily uncomfortable to experience. Questioning your own identity, but it's also something that's extraordinarily hard to put words to. It's something that's extraordinarily hard to express to others who haven't had that experience. And so it just kind of remains this like hidden sort of dirty secret almost, I feel like, in this space. And I am personally all about blowing the lid off the experience and the hidden parts of PPCS. So I'm so glad. And I know the people listening who are going through this right now will feel totally seen in this moment. So that gives me, so much, it brings me so much joy to be able to have this convo with you and to do that. So
beautiful. Thank
with
you.
that all said, sorry, now I've gotten myself all, wrapped up in the importance of talking about it. The exact question was, how did it affect me and how did I find my way back?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, how did you learn to love yourself? Like, yeah. How did it affect your identity? And then how did you find your way back? Or like, how did you discover who you were again?
Hard to summarize, but I will try. So in my experience, I like to describe it as it took me 6 months of no longer thinking like myself, talking like myself, or acting like myself to fully lose a sense of who I was. That was one of the most deeply profound experiences I have ever had, ever. And so going through something like that is entirely, it's incredibly challenging to put into words, the complete loss that you feel. What I did realize in that moment was that, so often people identify themselves and define themselves by external factors. And going through something like that, I heard people talking about that. I've heard that concept, but then actually living it was very different for me. In the moment, I was in too deep. I didn't have the cognitive wherewithal to do anything with that information. I just knew that I was like, oh my God, who am I? If I can't do this like myself, if I can't show up like that, if I can't, go forward in my life, who am I anyway? So I will say that every single concussion journey is different. I think that's always important to reference. And every single experience is subjective, although we do have some crossover in terms of experience and symptoms. As far as being able to, quote unquote, find yourself again, my most honest opinion is that it's a messy process. You have to be in your survival mode for as long as it takes to be able to get yourself to the next phase. And that involves a willingness just to coexist with the extreme discomfort of loss of identity. That being said, there are things that, in my opinion, that you can do to start kind of building back into it. But I really can only speak to this in a high level way without, otherwise I'm going to take us down a coaching route of, like working through those pieces. But in a very high level way, I think that it's important to acknowledge that this is an experience that can happen. First off, in PPCS, it can happen. It very commonly does. Doesn't mean it will happen to everyone, but it's also something that realistically, probably very deeply painful for a lot of people, but it is also something you eventually do find your way through. You absolutely do. People that I've spoken with who have had PPCS for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, so on and so forth, everyone has found their own way through. And the most empowering thing that I found in my experience, as well as what I'm hearing from others, is that there is this possibility of you being even happier with your version of self because you've created it. You have this opportunity. And I say for myself, I've had this rare opportunity to rebuild my life with intention. And that did not come overnight. This is me speaking very high level, but there are a lot of personal growth processes that you can go through. You can take yourself through, you can, get coaching for, you can talk to somebody about to be able to get to the point of acceptance, because that has to happen first. And that is not an easy thing to do.
No, it's so much easier to talk about it than to go through it and actually live it. So I thank you very much for sharing that. And I do hope that people listening will feel that connection, just like validation and to whatever degree, like any loss of ability is there's a grieving that has to happen. It's like, it is a change. It's different. And it's okay to acknowledge that. It's okay to be sad and upset and grieve that.
And to be angry for a while. You're angry, you're upset, you're scared, to feel fearful, it's like people who are going through, let's say, loss of a job, that can be extraordinarily painful as well. But then when you think about, loss of identity, that's on a whole different level. I don't think they can actually be compared. I think they're both very challenging events in these two examples. But yeah, but I just really want people to know that there is a way through, there is a way forward. Hard stop.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. I think I'm happy that that's being put out there. That is important. I'm curious what your experience of a concussion, what about your experience with concussion surprised you? Like I don't know how much you knew about concussions prior to this or not, but what was surprising?
Everything. As I cackle, I'm like, I have a little bit of dark humor that I've developed over the years to be able to manage some of these harder pieces. Truly, I guess the number one thing that I found the most surprising was the extent to which I experienced cognitive loss. I didn't know that was a thing. I think that generally speaking, like when the time that I grew up in, for example, as well as even now, maybe the general public has an idea of like a concussion means that, you have like a head injury of some sort. Maybe you have a headache, but really a lot of knowledge kind of taps out there unless you come from the realm of sport or unless you work in the medical field or healthcare wellness, or if you've known someone who's gone through an experience. And so this was completely eye-opening for me because I didn't know that a concussion could be at this level. So yeah. Yeah. I think that was just in my work experience, talking to people like you, like as I've talked to more and more people, that was especially at the beginning working in this population. I was like, oh, I had no idea that a concussion could completely turn someone's life upside down. Like you hear, oh yeah, like you just like what you said, you just think it's like, oh, okay, you bonked your head and you'll be fine in a few days or maybe a couple weeks, and like that's all the expectation. So yeah, I think it is important for people to see that, to hear it, to like, okay, these are things that can happen. So exactly. It's so important. It's that re-education piece that just like really lights a fire under me these days to re-educate, to talk, to have these conversations, and to find ways like your amazing podcast to share that knowledge with other people, because there are, like I mentioned earlier in our chat, there are massive gaps in knowledge.
Yes. And we will, I'm excited to jump back into that again as we go. But tell me in the meantime, what treatments or therapies or things did you try that worked or didn't work? Like, I'd love to hear that piece of your journey, the trying and the figuring out what helped.
Well, I have to take a deep breath to answer this question. And like on behalf of myself, but also on behalf of so many people who have gone through a concussion injury. So I will preface this with also saying, I think it's always important just to acknowledge if there are listeners who are earlier in their journey. I always like to preface and say, again, a reminder that my experience won't necessarily be your experience. They will be subjective and different in various ways. In general, I feel like there isn't like a standardized way that concussions are just treated through different cities, states, provinces, countries. There are lots of different sets of guidelines. There are quote unquote governing bodies, but that's a huge, huge gap that I see very consistently. And my experience personally was no different than that. I sought lots of different therapies of anything from, let's say physio, vestibular physio, chiropractor, RMT, kinesiologist, so on and so forth. Of course,
what is RMT?
Sorry, a registered massage therapist.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah, I should not use I should use the full title. So thank you for that reminder. Just as some examples, then I've also sought help within the holistic space. So acupuncture. I've heard of some people absolutely loving hyperbaric chamber therapy, oxygen. I haven't tried that personally, but I've heard whisperings of people enjoying that and finding value in it. There are so many different types of therapy. Those are just some examples of what I've sought. There were so many more as well. I even went to an osteo who specialized in cranial therapy, specifically around concussion and TBI. So I even sought that type of treatment. But this is just like this, my personal experience really. It's a great example just to show that when you have a concussion that is lasting longer than, let's say, a doctor expects it. Let's back up a moment. Majority of concussions are expected to heal within a few days to a few weeks, right? And when you exceed that time frame, the medical community will put you into the quote unquote persistent category. So once you're in that space, it's just, I've heard from so many people, it's not like there's just like, with a broken arm, it's, let's say it's a simple break. I'm not a medical professional, but it's kind of like you go to the doctor, you get an x-ray, you get casted, you're in a cast for X amount of weeks, you do therapy and you're good. But for concussion, it's not like that. And there isn't just a set path like that. So many people, myself included, you maybe if you're lucky to have a diagnosis of a concussion, you're then referred to a few different professionals. And from there, you can understand, oh, I have symptoms that are outside of this. Maybe I should seek someone else. Sometimes you don't even know what you're experiencing as a symptom, right? So it just ends up being a very messy space. And I see, a lot of people become very desperate, understandably so, just to regain a sense of self and to regain their lifestyle. And they're left going from appointment to appointment and providers and trying this therapy, this holistic therapy, medication, like lots of different ways. Yeah. And people find their way forward, their path forward in different ways. Again, concussions are subjective, but I do see just this general scramble that happens in terms of finding the right team for you.
Yeah, it is extremely challenging. I think that piece is so hard because there are so many different options and things that could be helpful, but also everybody's injury is different and presents differently. And there are, the 7 different profiles of concussion. Like there's the cognitive one it sounds like you had as well, and I'm sure you had some of the others as well. Probably they don't usually come one at a time, but there's so many aspects to it that it can be really challenging to find the right help along the way. It's like, I know that's why I'm really passionate about the coaching, like have somebody that, and if it's not a coach, if it's somebody else, like find somebody who can kind of be your, oh my gosh, what is the word? You're like
guide or your support or like
your guide, your team leader who can like look at the big picture and like manage it for you or like help you find the people and like know the options. Cause it makes a difference, especially if it just so crazy that we expect people whose brains aren't working properly to go and think and figure out who to talk to. And like, it's a challenging situation.
People can't see me, but I'm nodding emphatically. I'm like, yes, exactly. Just the conversation I had earlier with someone today, that's exactly what we talked about. And she was, a year into her experience with PPCS and hadn't heard the term before. So we talked about that. And then she was just describing, she's like, I just need someone. And I was like, it would be so nice if there was just a case manager that existed, like exactly what you just said, that just is like, you go to this person for this symptom, you go here for this concern, this is going to be valuable for you. But that doesn't exist. And like you said, the onus is on the patient to figure that out, but you don't know what you don't know.
Yep, exactly. That's why I'm hoping this podcast can get to everybody. Let's let everybody hear it. And there are people, like, I know I'm not the only like coach, but like people who know the space a little bit and can give some guidance along the way. And yeah, I'm guessing as far as like in the medical field, I fear that we're far from having a good case manager who knows all the things. Like I feel like we need to get some good education out there for the professionals and so that they understand what's going on better. Because it's so siloed. It's like you go to this person for this one thing and this is what they know really well. And then you go to somebody else. But with a concussion, it's just the brain injury is more cohesive. It's like more tied together and it's just harder to get all that pieced out.
Exactly. Let alone we're not talking about working with a perfectly functioning brain. We're talking about someone who's having severe challenges in doing basic things. And yet they're the one who has to transport themselves around to all these different appointments, be able to answer all the questions, to be able to even get more help and continue thinking like, there were, sometimes I was facing certain very big challenges that I didn't even recognize as part of concussion until someone knowledgeable, thank goodness, there was an OT that I met who specialized in concussion, which is very, very rare. She had a vested interest and she identified some things and she's like, oh, the reason you're struggling with this. And she was able to link it back and it made sense for me. But I was that typical layperson who'd never done this concussion thing before, a PPCS before, and I just didn't know.
Yeah. And I think I appreciate you bringing that up because I do think that there are like, for those who are listening, if you're looking for help, do search out specifically concussion, like specialized professionals, like people who say that they know concussion specifically, not just that they have it on their list of things that they provide, but somebody that is like, this is what I do. If you can find somebody that is concussion specialist, then that's ideal. There are also, I know that there are a lot of programs out there that do intensives where you go and you see, you don't have to necessarily go to all the different appointments at different places at different times. It's like, it's an intensive, you get OT, PT, speech, like other things like all together at once. I've seen good things come from programs like that. So if you can be on the lookout for something that is multimodal, it addresses multiple aspects of the person, not just one thing at a time, and especially those that are concussion specific. So those would be things I would recommend that people look for as they're trying to find help.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You said that so well. And there is one thing I'd like to add on to that on the lived experience perspective.
Yeah.
I would just like to highlight and underline and circle and, everything you just said. But also on top of that, I think I agree with you. The holy grail would be finding an organization that has multiple services in-house, so multiple providers in-house, because that's a great interdisciplinary team. And hopefully like the goal is with that type of setup, that type of model is that they're able to communicate about your case through the different providers. And that takes some of the weight off of the person who's injured. As well, for those people who are not seeking that, maybe financially constrained, whatever the reason is, can't find one, doesn't exist in your city or town. If you are seeking individual treatment providers, I describe it as when you have a concussion and PPCS, you are now in a crash course of self-advocacy. And I say you just advocate for yourself, whatever it takes. Find someone who specializes in concussion. And if that's not, letters behind their name, as sometimes it's not, just someone who has a lot of experience, because that makes all the difference.
Yes. Amen. Thank you for bringing that up. I do. That is because the concussion is different. Like it's just different than a lot of things. And people, I can tell you, unless things have changed in schooling, I hope they have. I don't know that they have, but like in my OT experience in school, like OTs especially are so broad. Like we cover so many things that I had, like, I think concussion was covered on one day during like a brain injury section day, which we probably talked about all of the things and concussion was mentioned. It's not like we don't get a lot of training, at least when I was going to school, which was a little while ago at this point, but maybe things have changed. I'm hoping that the conversations are happening more, and I think things are moving in a positive direction. But definitely, if you're looking for help, it is possible to find it, and definitely be looking for somebody who has had experience or training in concussion specialty.
Exactly. Even just a vested interest at the end of the day, someone who has, as an OT, it might be different, Canada versus US. I'm not a professional in that space, but finding someone who has a vested interest and who has practiced frequently with concussion. I think that even having that, as ground under their feet, I've found to be very, very supportive and very helpful. I will share on a personal note. I have worked with a couple different OTs, like through my recovery. And there was one in particular who was a very lovely person, like on a personal level, very lovely, but her complete lack of knowledge of concussion was evident. And it was a really terrible experience for me every time I went to see her, because the way she would treat, the way she would show up, the types of questions she'd have me answer every single week would just mean that I'm regressing, emotionally, regressing in terms of, my abilities, and even just like the mentally regressing into a space that I'd worked so hard to move forward from, as well as the at-home activities and exercises she would provide me, they would trigger symptoms instead of work with them. So living that experience, I did actually contact the company and I did let her go from my case. And I was very clear in advocating for myself, saying like, this is a very nice person that you have on staff. And personally, I really like her, but she has absolutely no experience or understanding of concussion. And every single appointment is triggering, and it's horrific, and it's leading to me slipping back in terms of my progress. So that being said, I did find an OT, as I mentioned a few moments ago, who did have a vested interest in concussion. And that meant that she was always the person at her office raising her hand saying, I'll take that case. I want those cases. And for me, on the patient side, it was incredible because she had such a breadth of knowledge in that space that she built over the years.
Thank you so much for sharing that. A couple things that I want to bring out from that. I love that you had the self-advocacy part where you're like, okay, this isn't working for me. I need to do something different. Please, help me out. And I think just an overall principle of keep looking. Like if somebody tells you you're crazy and what you're experiencing isn't real, definitely don't listen to them and keep looking. But that's the
there is help out there. And I want people to know that there is hope and there is help. There are quality providers who understand and who can provide help. And even though like you'll learn something from one and then you might learn something different from another, and it's going to be like help will happen and you're going to get the things that you need in the right timing. I think that's just a good general like underlying belief. If you can get there, I think that's a helpful way of thinking about things. But however you want to think about it, just keep going. Don't stop looking, because there is help out there, and it's okay to fire people if you need to. I think on the flip side of that too, though, recognize that there are, if you're firing them because it hurts every time, that's not necessarily the way to do it. But if they understand, and you know that they understand, like, yes, we're going to trigger symptoms a little bit, but here's what you can do to like calm back down and like tell me if it's too much. Like, you want somebody who's working with you actively, not just saying do this, and they don't know what to do if it's triggering things for you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I fully agree with that. So of course, there in any type of rehab and any type of recovery, whether it's, your brain or a physical part of the body that we can just easily see and touch, there usually is some pain involved, and some growing pains, if you will. And whether that's like a physical pain or that's fatigue being triggered or other symptoms, absolutely agree with you. But again, making sure that the person really does specialize, really does have a fulsome understanding in the space is essential.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just throw out this quick story that is coming up for me. I have a friend whose daughter had long-term concussion going on, and she went and she did a couple different programs, and it was helpful, but she also went and did a program at a vision therapist, and the vision therapist that she was working with was like, yeah, I know concussions. And like, she's like, I told her to so this was a teenager. So the teenager had been going by herself, and she was like, massive headaches afterwards. Like, it was really like challenging for her. And so her mom came in and sat with her, and she's like, this is triggering major symptoms for my daughter. Like, what's happening? And the therapist was like, well, I told her to let me know if she's starting to feel nauseous or dizzy, or like specific things that these exercises could and may typically trigger in people. And my friend was like, okay, she's never going to tell you those things and ask you to stop, because that's not her. Those aren't the symptoms that come up for her. She has these other things that would come up. And so just sometimes, again, whether it's self-advocacy or having somebody else advocate for you, and just being like, okay, look, here's what to look for. And like, sometimes you need to educate the professionals as well. So just wanting to throw that out there. And I think, things got better after that. They were able to communicate better, and she was able to take the rest breaks when she needed them, not just waiting for this other system that wasn't going to come up. So
yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that. I think that's a great anecdotal story to share with people.
Yeah. So just be aware that that's a thing. You might need to be educating your professionals sometimes, at least about your experience with it. So
yeah.
I would love to hear what things people around you, or like, what were some of the things that people said or did that was most helpful and least helpful. Actually, let's start with least helpful. Was there anything that was like, oh man, you think you're helping and you're really not? And then tell us what does help.
Yeah, interesting question. Okay. I think that's something that people do very, very casually without even really thinking, at least in, Western world, is when you see someone, when you pick up the phone and talk to them, it's like, oh, how are you?
Yes.
It's just like an instant question. And I learned in Concussion and PPCS that is one of the most horrifying questions that someone could potentially ever ask, based on my personal experience, again, as well as being in touch with many other people. And that's not something that someone intends. Maybe they do have they don't intend that in a negative way. They might have a very just either neutral affect, or they might mean that in a very positive, like, how are you today versus, when we spoke last month, like that kind of thing. But what they don't realize is that it creates so much pressure and so much stress within. And there's another layer to it. I think it also depends on what I refer to as different phases in your PPCS journey. Which phase are you in? Are you in the space where it's, approximately 1 to 1.5 years, like the early in, where it's still very hard for you to even acknowledge for yourself what you're going through? Because that type of how are you question, it hits really, really hard when someone hasn't found levels of acceptance within themselves, and then trying to figure out how to answer that to someone else. It could be very different, again, case by case, person by person. But that is one thing that I struggled with so much, and found it like one of the most, again, horrifying questions to be asked.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that is, it is interesting. And that was something that came up a lot when I was doing kind of some group coaching at a clinic. Like people would say, how do I respond when somebody asks like, how are you? Or like, or, especially after you've done some kind of treatment, like, okay, are you better now? Like there's this like expectation or like, yeah, it is. And it's such a, like, that is such a typical question. Like people don't even think twice about asking it. It's like, in fact, they don't even usually think about the answer. It's like, how are you doing? Fine. Okay. And then we get to the point that we really care about, it's like,
exactly. It's just a formality. Generally I'd say that it's like a privilege to have that as a formality. In what, again, like the way that I define things, the way I looked at things in like the neurotypical space, being like, oh, how are you? Okay, you're right. You think about like getting groceries. Like, are you really hyper present with those responses? I wish people would be, but no, generally both ways, I don't think they are, right? But then all of a sudden, you take something like that's just so, it can be said in such a flippant way. And then all of a sudden, when you have a concussion and PPCS and you are in the pits of struggle and you are just fighting through every single day through symptoms just to show up, just to do things like somewhat similarly to how you used to, that is a really different ballgame entirely. So that's the first answer that I have for you.
Okay, thank you. And can I make another point on that? I think it is such an important thing. I think people, well, two things really quick. The grief, like when people ask, how are you? I think it's important, especially as we're having this conversation, for people to hear like you can't stop or you can't expect everybody to not ask you that. So if you're a loved one, maybe just being aware of this, like, okay, sometimes that's a hard question for people. Like maybe we can try to not do it. And I had a friend tell me once that, her husband would ask her like, how was your day? And she was like, don't ask me to write an essay. Like it just like that question felt so overwhelming. Like you have to, it's an open-ended thing. I have to come up with like all of like, think about everything that happened, remember, like put it into words. Like it was such an overwhelming question.
Exactly. Yeah.
For loved ones, just be aware. And maybe if you just be aware of that. And then for the person dealing with it, like, again, you can't expect everybody not to, but you can decide how you want to handle it. Like if somebody asks that, you can just decide ahead of time, like, I'm just going to say fine. And I'm not even going to think any more about it. Like, I don't know if that would be helpful or not, but just throwing that out as a possible way to handle it, because I don't know. You tell me, do you think was that accessible? Could you have done that ahead of time and then like remembered that's how you were going to do it? Or was it just like every time it would bring everything up again?
You know what? That question, it just sent me flying emotionally. It just felt like, it felt like acknowledging that the person asking it had zero negative intentions whatsoever. And I never once thought that of them, whoever this person was, whether I knew them well or not. But it just felt like someone just standing in front of me with a mirror, and it was showing me the depth of my pain and my challenges and not having an end date to when I was going to be myself again. That's what that question would evoke for me. And so it's probably different for everyone. In my personal case, in some cases saying fine, like you said, and just moving on, like maybe at a grocery store or in passing, someone you're not going to see again, felt sufficient. And especially when I was in the first phase. So it took me about 2 years to get to the point where I was willing to start being very honest about the depths of my experience when people asked me how I was. That's a whole other conversation when I got there and I flipped the switch and like, wow, how incredible was that? But leading up to it, hard to just say fine when it was like a loved one or someone you're in touch with more.
Yeah. Yes.
But I do have a suggestion. Sorry, if I can tack this on. A suggestion for people who are asking someone who has PPCS, how are you? You could customize it with like one word. You could just say, how are you today? How are you in this moment? Maybe with a couple words. But if you narrow it down, I feel like that takes some of the pressure off of people. Because how are you is like, potentially someone could receive that as implying like, how are you? Are you better yet? So how are you today? How are you in this moment? How are you compared to yesterday? I feel like that's a way to kind of disarm a bit.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And a couple of times you've brought up the time frame for you. And can you just give us again, I want to hear the other part of my question earlier, which was what did people do or say that was helpful? But you mentioned a time frame that for you, it was like the first phase was like 1.5 to 2 years. And for people listening, again, and you brought this point out, but that may or may not be your experience. But for you, can you, and it's been 6 years, can you give us just like a broad overview of like, this is how many years in general it took for me to like get to different parts of your recovery?
Yeah, I'll start off by just acknowledging that it hasn't been like clean. Like it hasn't been like, in my mind, phase one has been like everything tied up with a bow. Phase two, everything tied
Yes.
up with a bow,
Yeah.
so on and so forth. That there's definitely some messiness at those borders, if so to say.
Mhm.
Let's see. For myself, the first phase, or the first part that's really stands out to me, is really just getting to the point of being willing to face all the shame, all the embarrassment, all the fear, and tell people an honest answer to how are you. That was huge. That was a pivotal point in my entire 6-year journey when I started just pushing myself to do that. And like, no, it wasn't comfortable. And no, I'm not sitting here saying it's easy, just do it. Not at all. I'm saying it's a choice you can make for yourself. And some people might find it sooner. Some people might find it later. Some people might mask for years on end. It really does vary, but I would like to encourage people. And when I work with people one-to-one, like this is something that we work on, is really encouraging people to find ways to start expressing for self what they're going through, to be able to unlock an ability to share with others, and so on and so forth. So that is that's the first sort of space for me that seems important. The next sort of phases, if you will, I haven't named them, but I probably should. Like, stay tuned for more. But then the next phase is really, we're along the lines of finding different types of, I guess, resolution for different symptoms and therefore life experiences I was facing. And that's a very messy space. I could not break that down and say within this time frame this was better. No, because maybe I had some small improvements in some ways, but overall I was still struggling. So it's interesting. I'd say up until last year I hit a point where, because for quite a long time going through this experience, I just kept on mentally being like, ugh, I have to change this. I have to carve a new path forward. This does not have to be as hard as it is right now. But I didn't have the cognitive wherewithal up until really last year to do anything with that. And so that's when I started really diving into what I was going to create, which we'll talk about later. But I do want to just really highlight that was a space where cognitively I was like, okay, I am thinking more like myself, at my, more clarity. Things are making a lot more sense. Executive functioning is coming back together, with an asterisk saying that I still did face some challenges. And to this day, I'll be very honest and say that I am doing really, really well compared to 6 years ago, compared to 2 years ago, compared to 3 years ago, so on and so forth. But I'm not 100% there. I still employ my very own strategies to be sure that I can make it through my day. I'm in a place now, though, where when I do that, I can be very effective. I just still am constrained by pacing, for example. And I like to put that out there because I am a working professional in the space and I do, make impacts in different ways. But I think it's important for people who are listening and even people who I'm working with to know that, I'm not personally 100% of the way there, but A, look at what I've been able to do, and B, the value of listening to your body and working within, meeting yourself where you're at.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right, let's go ahead and jump back to the what did people say or do that was helpful? Or like what advice would you give to people who are trying to support their person?
Yeah. So first off, I'd say that, and I'm not saying this is easy. This can be very challenging, especially the closer you are with someone, the more challenging it can be. But the first part I'd say is just to really hone your listening skills. Just if there's a way for the person, the caregiver, or the person who is supporting, maybe a friend or loved one, just to be able to be present and just hone listening. Just be there. Just say, hey, I'm here to listen. How's your day going? What's going on? Are you facing any challenges? Whatever the fitting question is for that person that they're supporting. And just be ready to just receive. And, maybe the person that you're supporting doesn't want you to throw a bunch of solutions at them in that exact moment, typical kind of like therapy piece where it's like, just hold that space for them to speak freely and try to limit your facial expressions if you're an expressive person and just hold space and just be present. I think that's huge. That is huge because a lot of people with PPCS end up feeling unheard and unseen. And yeah, so that is number one. Another thing that I think, and I'm trying to zoom out and think very generally based upon, a fairly large sample size. So taking a moment to think here. So listening is number one. Number two is asking, how can I support you with something very specific? So let's say that the person you're supporting is struggling with cooking, which is quite common after. It's a lot of multitasking and executive functioning goes into cooking. Let's say they're struggling to feed themselves. How can I help you with preparing this meal? Or can I help you by picking up your groceries for you? Can I place the order for you? And just kind of giving a very direct offer that takes the onus of the person you're supporting, takes the onus off of them a little bit. I think that's something that I found really helpful. That's something that I've heard other people say that has been very helpful as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And just, yeah. And if in doubt, just ask them, and somebody will, maybe they're not going to say it in the most eloquent way, but they will tell you what they're struggling with or what's on their mind. And those are the top two things that come to mind.
I love that. Thank you. I think that is so important. Speaking of advice, if you were able to go back in time 6 years ago, what advice would you give to yourself in the early days of your injury?
Ooh, this is giving me pause, this question, because immediately I have so many things coming to mind, but also at the same time, it's like a feeling of like nothing. Because, I think like the human urge when asked that type of question for a certain scenario is to be like, oh, I would just help myself get ahead. I would just give myself advice on how to just zoom through it. But the truth of the matter, which is one of the hardest things for me to accept, is that, therapies are important, very important, all sorts of therapies and appointments you can find for yourself and to work through different manifestations of your injury. But the passage of time is also important. And I heard this from my neurologist. I'd gone to a neurologist, I was sent to a neurologist, and my first appointment with him, I brought him this laundry list of all the appointments I was attending. And there were a lot. It was more than just the few that I shared. All the appointments I was attending, all the things I was doing, all the ways I was trying to use my high achiever personality to just push forward and to move through the way I would with anything else I've ever done. And he said, these are great. You're doing all the right appointments and all the right activities, but he's like, you do have to give it time. And this is from a neurologist. So for me, I mean, that was a whole thing for me to hear that from someone and be so upset by it, because I was there just to get the advice on what I do to continue getting to where I was going. So it's not really so much advice I'd give, but I think that it would just be a very loving, gentle reminder that time plays a role in recovery as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that a couple of thoughts that came up as you were saying that is just like, let the process happen. Like it is an interesting question, because like, now so much more. Like maybe a better question would be like, what advice would you give to somebody else that's early in their journey? Because for yourself, like it almost like you look back and you're like, okay, this is how it played out. And I learned things along the way. Like I know now because of all of the things. And if I missed those, I wouldn't necessarily know now. Anyway, I don't know if that makes sense, but the process, it is a process and letting that happen. And I think when you talked about going to the neurologist and being like, okay, I'm doing this and this and this and this, one of the things that I feel very strongly about that I share with people is we all want to know what to do to get better. And there are things you can do. Like as a therapist, I definitely know things to do that you can do to improve with the symptoms and all of the things. But one of the most important things that gets pushed aside so fast is rest. Like the rest is, it feels like not doing, but it is key. And so giving your brain and your body periods of rest, even like throughout the day, being proactive as well as reactive about your rest breaks, but letting, like, I like to say that the rest is kind of what gives, like you're doing all these things, you want to like plant this garden, but the rest is what gives it space for it to grow. It's like it creates that space to allow what you're doing to actually take root and grow. So you have to give that, and maybe that's part of it. Takes time, like the rest piece. Or you can't rush or like can't force something to grow faster. You have to do the things that you can, and with the time and the space between. So I appreciate you bringing those things up, because I think those are important things to.
That's exactly it. That rest piece. Rest is important, but also when we talk about rest in the space, what I didn't know was that active rest plays a huge role. Because I used to, my layperson understanding of concussion and PPCS was rest was like, oh, do you mean sleeping? Am I supposed to nap a lot? Am I supposed to sleep a lot? But no, it's active finding, learning what active rest is, and learning to pepper that in throughout your day.
Can you just share really quick what you have found effective for yourself with the active rest piece? Like what works for you?
Yeah, I can. Well, one thing that I just also will say that's kind of interesting is that my old self used to think that reading a book in sunlight was restful. I used to find that restful. I used to find that relaxing and restful. And so it really, I mean, everything in my life was upended, including even just simple concepts like this, completely upended. I was like, well, if that's now doing something like that with PPCS, that is engaging and hard work for my brain. I'm in that type of lighting. I'm reading. I'm working with comprehension. I'm practicing working memory by reading, like all these pieces. So for me, what worked really well for active rest was breathing exercises and following some, I'd play some on, not in earbuds because that was too much stimulation sound wise for me, but I'd play it like on a speaker further away, just some breathing exercises or practicing some very, very light, I want to say almost just stretching. I was going to say light yoga, but no inversions or anything, just some very light stretching where I'm just allowing my mind just to exist. And I'd allow myself to close my eyes, but remain awake. It's kind of, I had to learn how to find that balance between sleeping, resting, and active rest. And especially with a concussion, because anything that you partake in, your brain is working on and working to do. It's just that beforehand, with a neurotypical brain, you're not having to think about all the processes that are involved. But when you have a brain injury, your brain has to work super hard to be able to do things, even to shut down for rest. It is working to do that. Even to ignore one sound is working to do that. So
Yes,
those are things that I found useful. And everybody will have to find their own. Some people, because experiences are subjective, some people are able to read a book and they find that restful, just not in my particular case.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you. I love having people share things that were helpful for them because again, yeah, the more ideas people have, things to sample, the better, I think. Okay, so another question that I feel is really important to bring up is how you maintained hope throughout your recovery journey, please.
So I didn't. My very honest answer, I didn't. Initially, I had hope. I came into this experience of concussion and PPCS in this like weird space where my brain was no longer working the way it used to, but I still was connected to the concepts of how I used to think and how I used to be able to do things. So I did have hope for the first while. And I would constantly ask every single provider that I saw, and I saw people 5 days a week for a while. I would ask them, like, what's the end date? Do you know an end date now? You didn't know one last week, but do you know one this week? Because I was trying to anchor myself into a goal and an end date to keep my hope alive and to know that I was driving at something that will end and that I will get to have my life back. That didn't happen in my case, and it took many years. And I went into it was like very, very much a full life derailment, which was very painful, a lot of trauma. I refer to it as lost trauma. You lose in so many different areas of your life. So at one point in time, it's painful even now to say, but I did lose a sense of hope. And I think that's an experience it can be universal when you are as a human in an experience that is lasting for what feels like an extraordinary amount of time, months and even years. So what was so I want to share that very honestly, because I think it's so easy just to give an answer and be like, oh, I did X, Y, and Z, but that's not the case. This experience can be messy. So I want people to see the full spectrum. What I did do and what I was able to do is I actively made a decision to take myself on a personal growth journey. This was a few years into my experience. I was very much like not feeling too hopeful in a lot of different ways about getting out of this and reclaiming my lifestyle and reclaiming my abilities and what I love to do and reclaiming freedom. But I took myself on a very intensive personal growth journey. And I started, consuming different content in little bits because I still had a very hard time listening to the amount of information provided in podcasts, what totally overwhelmed my system. So I only started hearing like little bits and bites from different people who are in the personal development space. And I started consuming that type of content. And I eventually repetition dissolves disbelief, as they say. And if you consume a certain type of content about, the power that we have within, or, different types of self-empowerment, eventually you start feeling it to be true. And I got myself into thinking in different ways. It was very much an intentional process. And it wasn't like an overnight thing. And it didn't just happen after listening to one 10-minute talk, like nothing like that. It was over a period of time. I found myself that I was willing to show up because I hit a point that was very dark and very hard. And it was a choice of like, okay, I can stay drowning, or I can do something different and I can choose to get to the surface and I can swim. And so in doing that type of practice, that's how I found my way back to, rebuilding the sort of self-concept and self-empowerment, and trying to find little tiny things that I could control in my life, because then that gave me a sense of, oh, I've won this, I've won that. And even now when I work with someone, like I talk about wind stacking, which is not necessarily just a Chaandani idea. It's, it's taught in different types of therapy, and OTs as well speak about this. So engaging in different types of content that stretched my mind into a place of empowerment and away from total loss. Practicing wind stacking. So setting yourself up for small, tiny little wins, but then, allowing those to accumulate over a period of time. And eventually I started feeling hopeful again. And it was an incredible feeling. I almost remember the exact day that my brain just kind of was like, oh, there is hope. Like myself and I, we are moving forward. So that was my experience with it. And since then, sorry, I need to add one more thing onto this, because losing hope going through a multi-year PPCS journey can be quite common. One thing that is so important for people to know is that you can build it back, and you can and will continue improving in different ways. So
thank you. Amen to that. And I think that going forward, I should change that question, because I think that you're not the first person who has told me, like, no, I didn't maintain hope. Like it wasn't always there. And I think that's so good for people to hear. Like, I really appreciate your honesty and the rawness and vulnerability there, because it does get dark. It can get dark. And if that's where you are right now, please know that you're not alone, and it can get better. So if you can't believe it for yourself, rely on somebody else who's been there, who's heard it so many times, that it can get better and it can be built again. I remember talking to a client and her husband actually was one who said this. He was like, we gave up on hope. We gave up on seeking hope. And it just made me want to cry. It was it feels so raw, so hard, so dark, right? You are not in a happy place at that point, right? But knowing that hope is, it does survive. It is something that can come back and can bloom again. I hope that people can hear that about hope. So thank you for sharing that.
No, and thank you for sharing that piece as well. And you got emotional, and I felt that coming up for me as well, just because I can connect with that feeling so easily still. I've worked through things, I've attended lots of therapy, and I've worked through lots of parts of this experience, but it's very easy for me just to tap right back in and know the feeling of that level of hopelessness, and it's not a good place to be in.
Yeah.
But no, again, you can regain it and you can move forward.
Yeah. Thank you. I really, really appreciate you sharing that. So, and I love, again, just how much this has driven you to want to do good in the world and help people who are in this community. So tell us what you're doing, how you're helping people. I would love to get that out there more.
I would love to. So I've created a company called Return to Life. It can be found at returntolife.ca, all spelled traditionally. And I'll start by kind of sharing my overall goal, what I endeavored to accomplish. I would like to change the conversation being had around PPCS fully. And so in order to do that, I'm showing up in a couple of different ways in the space. Because of course, as you know, at this point, I am a lived experience expert, but I've also taken time over the past couple of years to really ingrain myself in the concussion space and get quite informed about lived experience, as well as I stay on top of current research and findings, and I'm quite involved in different ways. And so the way that I'm showing up to serve is that I'm providing educational workshops to concussion professionals. And the goal in doing so is to provide real life insights to help bolster their practical knowledge. And I have very specific workshop offerings. Well, if somebody's interested, I'm sure they'll reach me, but I'll just kind of give a high level of how I'm affecting change in the space on this podcast. And I'm also, it's very exciting. Also, as you mentioned in my bio, I'm building out a learning community for professionals. That is something that I'm just kind of putting out there right now. I will, when I get into pre-launch, I'll be talking about it more on my socials, and really excited to have a place for people to gather and to learn.
Awesome.
And what I was doing is serving people one-to-one. So helping people with PPCS understand their mental energy specifically so that they can get back to certain activities that they miss, or perhaps doing multiple things in a day. So it is a very hyper-specific offer. I'll be honest, I am transitioning right now to fully be serving businesses, as I feel that's the way that I'll be able to rally the people, is so to say, rally businesses, and to be able to affect change on a greater scale. So I am still, when capable, when I have the capacity, I am taking people one-to-one. But those are the ways that I'm showing up in the space. And I feel so privileged to be able to take from my experience and to step out and to create a different pathway forward. One thing that I'm also very, very passionate and lit up about doing is I've been building out this network of professionals all across the US, across Canada, as well as in the UK and in New Zealand. And these are professionals who are specialists in the concussion space. They're individuals, they're companies. And I've been bringing us together in different ways, and just kind of preparing for something really amazing longer down the road. So
awesome. I can't wait to hear and see how it plays out. That's fantastic. And I love what you're doing. It is so needed. So thank you for that. And I assume people can learn all that they want and need to from your website and get in touch with you through that.
Yes, I think in the show notes we'll have my website, as well as if you feel like sending me an email, please, I invite you to connect with me, whatever side you're on, if you're a provider, if you are someone who's working through PPCS yourself. Also, my LinkedIn will be included in the show notes if you'd like to connect that way too.
Perfect. Okay. Yes, we'll have the email, the LinkedIn, the website, all available in the show notes. So check those out. And thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for having me and for creating this incredible resource for everyone.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.